Ladies and gentlemen, the episode we just are covering? Was the episode Season 1, Episode 15, Feeling Pinkie Keen, which is the episode in which we are first introduced to Pinkie Sense, and in which Twilight is like, nah, it doesn't exist. It apparently makes me sneeze. Oh my goodness. All the sneezes today. So, obviously this is the best episode ever made in the history of ever. All in favor? Okay, good. No, I am actually kidding. Yes, I have a lore sense, and it's usually right, but only about bad things. Like economic things. End of video. Bye! No, so, let's go through this in order, shall we? Because that's how I normally do this. First of all, it's interesting to me the implication. I don't remember if this ever actually comes through again. That you need to have the target of the spell concentrating in addition to the caster of the spell concentrating. Like, you notice how Spike screwing up is what screwed up Twilight's overall casting. That could just be Spike was distracting her, and it may not mean anything, but it's interesting to think about, especially for certain types of spells, like Polymorph or whatever. In other words, to put this into simplistic D&D terminology, there is such a thing as a willing caster, or a willing target, and an unwilling target. That's why some spells have will check. You know, you can make a will check if you were an unwilling caster. So, just something to mention. So Pinkie Sense is introduced. I do like to think that over time she just kind of had to figure out what Pinkie Sense meant, thanks to trial and error. I mean, if you've had something that for the last 20 years has been true of your life consistently, you could probably come up with like a spreadsheet or a chart and be like, yeah, okay. Will stands for willpower. It's a type of resistance check, Savacom, that you can do in Dungeons and Dragons. I usually just truncate it to will check, same like con check or dex check, or sometimes a reflex check or a constitution save. There's actually a lot of different terminology that all refers to the same thing. But anyways, Pinkie does mention this thing sort of runs in the family, and we do know that Maud has Maud sense later. That actually comes up in an episode, although very, very briefly, but it is actually there. So, naturally, Twilight immediately slots in as the super skeptic, and Spike instantly slots in as the instant believer. Yay. I'm just going to jump into this. I don't actually like this episode that much, even though it's also... So this is a hard episode to talk about, because this is an episode that is weirdly, simultaneously, very well written and very badly written. Right at the same time. I don't even know what to make of this one. There's actually several moments which are clearly showing their work, or actually doing a good job of constructing jokes. I mean, this episode actually made me laugh several times. It also has several nice little references and several decent background continuity nods. And then there's a scene where she literally pushes aside some soap bottles on top of a box to speechify. And then there's a scene where she has to jump all over a cliff, and they literally call it a leap of faith. There's a term for that. It's called on the nose when it comes to writing. It's when something is too obvious, basically, to summarize the concept. Oh yeah, by the way, my show's not for kids. Kappa, if you're watching this, piss off. Anyway, so... whatever. Yeah, this is... Spike being an instant believer does make a bit of... Yeah, suicide. Spike does make a bit of sense in the fact that he is an instant believer because he is effectively a child. Okay, sure, kids are more likely to believe that sort of thing. Twilight being super skeptical... I'll cover that in a moment. So... This is the introduction, if I'm not mistaken, of Gummy. Am I right? Because I think this is the first time we've seen Gummy on camera. Gummy is the alligator pet of Pinkie. And what's hilarious, let me actually say really quick that I think that Gummy is the worst of the animal pets they introduced over the course of the show. We all know Spike, or not Spike. Oh god, the turtle. I can't think of his name. Ah! What's the name of the turtle? Tank! Tank, thank you. Tank is the best, obviously. I meant Tank when I said Spike, and I was like, that's wrong. Okay, so... But I do find it appropriate that Pinkie Pie would have something that's technically incredibly dangerous, and yet, thanks to very specific circumstances, is not. She has a pet alligator that has no teeth. And is also basically brain dead, except when he has the occasional philosophical thought, so that's... Anyways, moving forward. So then the literal soapbox scene happens. Move the soap off the box. I do have to say, I do like how the episode is re-continuing a thread from, well... Oh my god, what is with my nose? Stop it! I do like how there's a continuing thread coming forward from the episode, whose name I can't think of, which is Don't Judge a Book by its Cover episode. You know, Zecora. You know, the Zecora thing. Yes, I have an itchy nose! Wait, that's not what that one was. That was Twitchy Tail. I don't have a tail that you know of. I like the idea that they continue the concept of the difference between magic and superstition. Because magic is a fundamental, understood, dare I say, scientific thing. There are spells, there are components, there are rules to magic that make sense and are well established within the confines of the setting. It is something that is actively being studied. And then there's nonsense, which is, you know, the concept of hexes, for example. And... She is presuming that this is the other category, that this is something that, you know, just makes no sense. Or, and in short, doesn't actually exist. If you're paying attention at this point in the show, the concept of other, you know, non-understood magic doesn't actually exist, at least at this point in the show. That hasn't been promised yet, or profited. Proffered, there we go, proffered. We will see other kinds of magical interactions later on, but at the moment, it's just there's magic and then there's Pinkie Pie. Also a further distinction from Trixie, who used, you know, magic tricks as opposed to magic or magic. So we got 3 distinctions so far going throughout the show. Then Pinkie flat out says, "You don't believe because you don't understand." And this is when the episode starts to lose me a little bit. Because Twilight's a moron in this episode. Now, don't mistake me. I like the fact that Twilight is a flawed character. No, I do. It would be extremely easy for the super rare, amazingly unique pony who is a personal, what's the word? Protege of the ruler of the country, who is extremely powerful in magic and very smart. It would be easier for her to drift into Mary Sue territory, basically. I like the fact that she doesn't, and that they take several efforts several times to drag her back down to earth by giving her both flaws, mistakes, and screwing up, right? They've actually already been doing this, so this isn't exactly a new thing. So I do like that she screws up here. I'm actually with that. But the problem is, what she does here in this episode is a little bit too much. For the hell of it. Just for kicks, really. Did I close it? Oh, shoot, I closed it. Hang on. Just for the kicks, I decided to pull up this neat image. Now, I'm not going to share it with you because screw that. But it's this wonderful image that really helpfully explains scientific method. I swear this is relevant, so hear me out. You ask a question, you do your background research, you construct a hypothesis, you test with an experiment. Is the procedure working? No. Well, then you troubleshoot carefully, check all steps, and then test with an experiment. You keep doing that until the procedure starts to work. Once it works, you analyze the data and draw conclusions. If the results align with your hypotheses, you communicate your results. far more likely your results will not align, either partially or not at all, with your hypotheses. Then, this is a part that most fiction tends to skip. This is the most critical part of the scientific method right here. The experimental data you gathered now becomes future background information for future projects, yourself or anyone else's, because now you have new information with which to construct a hypothesis in order to test a new experiment. That loop right there is the critical element of the scientific method, in my opinion. Because, yes, science is not about what is or is not possible. That's not... Fiction screws this up all the time. And it's usually because fiction wants to put science in opposition to faith, which is inaccurate. It's like putting football in opposition to food. There's no direct corollary between those two things, right? Excuse me, nose. And that irritates me every time they do it. It reminds me of Voyager actually did that several times as well. And you'd think Pinkie, Twilight, who has an entire basement filled with Dr. Frankenstein's tech, that she would know that, but, whatever. You get my point. Well, see, now that's interesting, Savacom, because football can be in opposition to health food, but you understand why that's not an automatic opposite. It's not like thinking, are the lights on or off, which is a clear and deliberate opposite and parallel to each other. Anyways, so that's what irritates me most about the episode, is she basically just becomes a skeptic just because, and there's actually a specific point. It's actually further on in the episode. I'll get to it in a second. But there's a specific point in the episode later on where she becomes ridiculously skeptical, and it stops being funny or interesting. She's basically just become a straw man at that point. It's like, okay, whatever. But we'll get to that in a second. Rewind a moment. I mentioned this episode made me laugh a few times. Oh no, I'm getting the combo. What's that mean? Slam! Have you seen Twilight? Yeah. Do you two plan that? Plan what? That one got a laugh out of me. There's also another one. Yeah, the slapstick is surprisingly well designed, and it's mostly because the voice acting goes along with it well. Because then, hang on, before we get to the anvil bit, then there's her following into the thing, and Applejack, who's off camera, you just hear her say, hey, Twilight, you came to visit my new apple cellar. Twi, you okay? Twi? That one's probably my favorite gag in the whole episode, honestly. But yeah, then there's the part where they start referencing Rear Window. Quick question. How many of you have ever even heard of or seen Rear Window? I'm just idly curious. I have. I suppose I should raise my hand on that one. Rear Window. It's a Hitchcock thing. There are several very obvious and deliberate Rear Window references with regards to Twilight when she's watching Pinkie. I just thought I'd mention that because, once again, we see the animators and designers are tossing in stuff in there, either because it's for their own sake or it's for the adults who are watching with their kids, one of the two. I'm just pointing it out as it goes. That's all. It's just another reference I wanted to mention. Anywho, so then... Kong. I'll admit that one got me. But I could be wrong. But is this not the first time in which we've actually seen Derpy Hooves' eyes deliberately crossed? Let me explain what I mean by that. So she appeared early on, and then her eyes were screwed up as a animation error, right? And she kept showing up in a background character, but here and there, sometimes her eyes were crossed and sometimes her eyes were not. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that she has been a character that the camera is focusing on, rather than simply another background character. And her eyes are very deliberately crossed. In other words, the first time we could say in lore that she is Derpy Hooves, or whatever they called her. Muffin, I think? I think it's Muffin. I'm pretty sure. But either way, I wanted to comment on that because it makes perfect sense that Muffin would be the one who does that. And for the record, I do think Muffin is hysterical in several of the ways they showcase her later on. But either way, I just wanted to point that out. So, so the slapstick happens, the Rear Window happens. This is the exact moment when Twilight becomes ridiculously skeptical. And it really does. That is the exact, up until that scene, like, so, Muffin drops all the stuff on her, and up until this point, she's mostly just been trying to observe Pinkie. Now, she mentions she's using, I don't think she used the word scientific method, but she mentions several times the word, we're going to scientifically look into this, and that's not what she's doing, which kind of irritates me a little bit, because, again, fiction doesn't understand what the word scientific means. Then she just becomes kind of a prat. And again, it's forced drama, Baron, exactly. This is the exact moment in which the episode loses me, because not only does she become a prat, but then there's the fact... Oh, you're right, I didn't even think about that one, Rascal. You're right, they did have the Natural Habitat Discovery Channel thing going on while she was doing that. I forgot about that. Even had the music. Anyways, then we have Spike, who goes from being a believer in things to being ridiculous about it. And this is kind of what irritates me, because this could have been done well. Both sides are being portrayed, are being pushed into extremes in both directions. And both are wrong. But it's not portrayed that way. It's portrayed as if Spike's just being cartoony and Twilight's being a prat and wrong. Like, do you think that can happen? Do you think you could explode twice? What if she explodes twice and then explodes a third time? The only thing I will give that scene is Applejack, who the whole time it's worth noting, is legitimately concerned about Fluttershy, but is the only one in the middle of the four of them. She's just like, no, I don't think you can actually explode twice. I don't think that's a thing. We just need to go and save her, all right? Let's go. It's the only thing I'll give that scene. So, then they see the Hydra. Okay. As usual, there's one head not in sync with the rest. They start running. Ah! Now, I like that too, Weods. I actually like that too. I will give the episode one weird credence. So someone already mentioned it in chat. Twilight, if you pay attention, Twilight doesn't use magic during the entire encounter with the Hydra. I know this sounds strange, but that actually makes sense to me. Because I know what panic feels like in real life. And the show goes out of its way many times to repeatedly show that they are truly panicked. Not afraid, not oh no, like in an actual state of legitimate panic. And you just don't think straight when you're like that. Yeah, Pinkie literally froze. Twilight had to run around, grab her, and pull her away because she had frozen in fear. So, I'm kind of with that. Even though, obviously she could have easily dealt with this 15 different ways with magic. We've already showcased that she could lift something heavier than this with magic when she was dealing with the giant bear thing, the Ursus Minor, and blah, 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 blah. There are other examples of this before this. However, and Aethel got there before me, of course, I really, really like the scene. I know this sounds like such a stupid thing to cheer, but when Fluttershy was like a hop, skip, and a jump, and then jumped about, I just was, yes! Because, first of all, it's continuity. It's actually probably my favorite type of continuity. Oh, don't mistake me. I like string continuity as much as the next person. But my favorite type of continuity is just that little stuff where future things acknowledge past things. Continuity. And I love that. I love that sort of stuff. Eat it up. Anyways. So Twilight charges the Hydra, twists its neck. Pretty smart thing to do. Can't teleport, I already mentioned that. And then, jump, Twilight! No, I can't do it. You have to make a leap of faith. As I already mentioned, the episode is a little bit too on the nose, but I think what irritates me a little bit more is that it's not just on the nose, but it's kind of the wrong lesson. This episode has nothing to do with faith. Nothing. That's actually part of what irritates me about it. It is slanted in a way to be perceived as such, depending on how you look at it. But really, if you look at it with even a minorly analytical mind, what you're seeing is that Twilight is seeing something that she does not accept in her worldview, and therefore is resisting, even though what Pinkie is doing is actually, by the rules as established, magic. No, it really is. Think about it. Because remember, the way magic works in this setting is it is a form of energy that can be controlled and processed in a very logical and understandable way. As someone said in chat earlier, it's basically their version of science. What Pinkie Pie does is repeatedly, provably demonstrable. This equals that 100% of the time, right? And because of the fact that that is such a direct and immediate corollary, it is effectively simply a form of precognition. Now, whether it's literally because she's magic or because it runs in the family or whatever, it doesn't actually matter, because what she is doing is a demonstrable, magical, scientific fact. And I emphasize that word demonstrable. This episode by itself demonstrates the direct parallel between events, right? I mean, God's sakes, even the episode ends on a twitchy tail and then Celestia just comes colliding down from the sky. Yeah. So anyways, that's the point, is that this is an episode about Twilight. If I could just give my own opinion on this, because I told this to my niece too when she watched this for the first time with me. It is my opinion that this is not about having faith. It's not about making a leap of faith. It's not about trusting your friends or whatever. It is entirely about being willing to accept new changes to your worldview if they are something that can be proven to be true. In short, this is, yes, this had holy guacamole. In short, what Twilight is doing is basically digging her heels in. And, I mean, you can see why that could be considered a bad thing, considering how often digging your heels in tends to be a bad thing when it comes to real life, you know? Not that stubbornness is always bad, it's worth noting. But if, I don't know, I'm trying not to think of examples, because unfortunately most of the examples I could think of are what I would consider controversial territory, you know? Like if life has moved on. You know what, I got one. Imagine for a moment, no, Baron, no. Imagine for a moment if someone from the 1800s is teleported here, and they are super racist against people who have black skin, okay? And they then interact with a decent level of modern society and find out that they are completely demonstrably wrong. And they then dig their heels in about that. No, they're inferior, or whatever the hell they think. That would be a good example of how that could be applied. I mean, this is true on a small level, too. I just thought of an example. I just thought of a good example that's not controversial. You ready for this? There can't be a Mario RPG. That's a terrible idea. No! So, point made. I don't know what you're talking about, Baron. There's no Mario RPGs. There can never be a Mario RPG. It's not scientific. Dig the heels in. Dig the heels in. I was one of those people, as I like to make fun of myself for. I was also not the only one of those people. There was actually a fairly large number of people who, when they saw Super Mario RPG, were like, no! And then it came out. So, yeah. Anywho, that's actually all I got for this episode. I do have a question. I don't think this episode ends on a wah-wah, but I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Like, if you thought it qualified. What is getting in the way here? Oh, it's this thing. I wasn't thinking it as such either. It does end on a gag, but that's not really the same. That's why it's kind of like... If I was to headcanon and world build, like if you handed me the reins of the show and I had to explain everything in lore, I would say that somewhere in the past, the Pie family actually had unicorns in their family. And basically, bit by bit, the magic was diluted, but it's still there. This would also explain their super speed thing, which I remind you is actually in lore. If you remember, there are future episodes which showcase both Maud and Pinkie as having literal super speed. So that's all. That's all I would do to kind of explain it away. It's not like there probably isn't some magic in every pony to some extent or another, as we've talked about before. It's also worth noting that there are different types of magic. That's fair, because we have pony magic, which is clearly and demonstrably harmonic magic. Then we have changeling magic, which is a bit different. And then we have chaos magic, which is not used all that often, except when it's used all the time. But yeah, I would say that I think that Pinkie and indeed most of the Pie family probably have more magic than normal. So that's just my take on it. I suppose I should also mention that alicorn magic is specifically mentioned to be different from unicorn magic as well, but let's not get into that, because that's still just another layer of harmonic magic. Anyways, so it's entirely possible that they have some form of magic somewhere in their background. Shrug. It doesn't necessarily matter, although I have to admit, I agree with what Sinister Wing said, in that what they have, feels a little bit more like chaos magic than any of the other types that we have demonstrated on camera. Maybe, Baron. I don't know. The good news is that's not really a dragon egg. Right? Anywho, I am going to go ahead and chop off the local recording. If I can. If I'm physically able to do so. There we go.